Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of Property Gold. I'm one of your hosts, Matthew Goldie.
And I'm the other host, Justin Goldie. So we are the directors of Goldson Homes, which is a property maintenance, management, and sourcing company based in the south of the UK.
So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking through some of the top investment strategies that we have looked at personally, that we're going to be looking at probably implementing in the coming months, years, possibly. What are some of the different strategies that we've obviously looked at?
So I think obviously within property you've got so many different strategies that you can go into. I mean, you can go on YouTube and type in however
Yeah,
many different strategies that there are. But I think overall each of the strategies will fit into one of the main sort of I think there's three groups really that you can fit into. You've got your buy to let, which could be buying a property and letting it out. However you let it out, could be through an HMO, serviced accommodation, maybe commercial property, you're renting it out
yeah, whatever
to a
property
company,
type it is, even. Yeah,
industrial, something like buy to let. Then I think you've got your development stuff, which would be sort of, even if it's a flip, that could be sort of development, as long as you're selling it at the end or buying a piece of land, developing a house on that land, and then selling it. That would be the sort of development flip sort of strategy. And then you've obviously got rent to rent, which is sort of a lot of people are doing that
yeah,
nowadays. And that would be renting a property and then at a lower rate and then renting it out at a much higher rate,
yeah, of course,
depending
and
on the contract.
profiting on that,
So yeah,
definitely.
so
Yeah,
I think we've done a lot of research into the properties, well, into the strategies that we want to be doing, because we are looking at actually getting our own property. And yeah, so this episode is just going to be based off of the main strategies that we are personally looking into doing, and we think is a good starting point for anyone looking to get into property.
yeah, and this is going to be mainly focused on residential, so housing and stuff like that. I don't think we've got the funds at the moment to go into commercial or industrial at the moment, but I won't put that past us for now. You never know what might happen.
Yeah, I'd like a bit of industrial. Do some industrial units. That'd
Yeah,
be good
get a
enough. But
warehouse on
yeah,
the go. They're quite profitable if you do the right things with them.
later on down the line.
Right, so let's just jump straight into it. One of the first strategies and one of the most popular ones is a buy to let strategy. Like you were saying, you buy a property, and then you're gonna let it out to, whoever you're letting it out to, a tenant or whatever. So most of the time with a buy to let strategy, you're going to be looking at getting a mortgage, unless you've got the cash to do that. So a buy to let mortgage is usually about 25% deposit. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think that's the minimum deposit you'll get away with. I know some lenders may do a 20% deposit loan to value that you could look at. So yeah.
yeah, and I think one of the key factors that we looked at is with a buy to let, you can get an income generating property quite quickly. So you can buy a property that's really in good condition. I mean, that's what you're aiming for. And then you can let it out quite quickly and get that income flow straight into your bank account quite quickly, which is obviously very good. It just does depend a little bit on the condition that you're looking for. Um,
Yeah, so I think obviously when we're saying buy to let, it would be straight like a property that we could buy and straight away get tenants
yeah,
into,
let
not
it out
do
straight
any
away,
work, which is probably the most simple strategy you could do. Literally just buy a property off the market,
and
get
then
some
yeah,
tenants in there,
tenants it straight away,
and
and
you've
you've
got
got that
money.
income
Yeah.
straight away. So some of the pros that we have noticed, is you got long-term wealth builder. If you're going to be keeping the properties for extended periods of time, and just building a portfolio, you're going to have that wealth, especially with the appreciation of property.
Yeah, so that will be mainly coming from your capital gains. So of course you've got the rental income,
Yeah,
um, which is quite good, and that will be obviously giving you the actual hard cash in your hand every month. But the unrealized profit that you'll be making is within the capital gains. So obviously, as the property appreciates in value, so after 20 years, the property could be worth double what it's worth now. And that is the long-term wealth that you are building,
yeah,
especially if you're then getting another property and you're doing this over a big
yeah,
portfolio. As that builds up, you can then sort of refinance later down the
Yeah,
line.
and it really compounds as you build your portfolio.
Exactly, and
Yeah,
pull that money out. So yeah, compound interest on, well, compound value, I guess, on the property that you're doing. Because if
yeah.
it goes up 3% per year, that's on that value. So yeah, it could be.
And I mean, for most of you, you're going to be taking out a mortgage, a buy-to-let mortgage for this, and that is widely accepted by most mortgage lenders, which is quite good. And then another thing is that it's quite passive. Once you've set it up, I mean, depends on how you set it up. If you give it to a lettings agent, it is quite passive. They can handle everything for you. If that's what you want to do, you're obviously going to be paying them a little bit extra, cutting down your profits a little bit, but it's it makes it easier on you if that's what your aim
Yeah,
is.
so I think realistically, how passive you want it to be will depend on how much you want to receive back from it. So if you letting it out to a lettings agency, you're probably going to be looking at around 12% for the lettings fees,
Mm,
and that's what for the management fees to actually just manage the property. So if there's any maintenance issues, they will organise the contractors and the entry and getting tenants in there and making sure the tenants pay. So that's the sort of passive bit about it, but you will be losing that 12% of the rental income paying
yeah.
them to do so.
Or you could just go and manage it yourself, but then you've obviously got the extra time involved with it
Yeah.
and everything like that.
So obviously we've spoken about the pros, so let's jump onto some of the cons. So the one con with buy to let is obviously with the mortgage, that will you'll be paying that mortgage. Now with the change of Section 24, if you buy this property in your personal name, you will not be able to deduct the interest amount of that mortgage payment from your tax liability. So from that rental income, which will be profit, you will not be able, well, there'll be your income. You will not be able to deduct the interest, which is an
From the
expense,
mortgage,
of
yeah.
course, off of that rental income. So the entire rental income is effectively a profit.
Yeah.
Whereas if you buy it in a limited company, which introduces additional costs, you will be able to deduct the interest as an expense from the rental income. However, obviously, as I mentioned, you will have the additional expense of running a
Yeah,
limited
yeah,
company.
of course. Some of the other cons that are associated with this, if you're going to be managing it yourself, or even if estate agents are going to be managing it for you, you've got legal responsibilities as a landlord. You've got gas safety, ERCRs. You got to make sure your tenants comply with certain rules that you set out for the property, and then also go just the risk of the tenants being in your property, non-payment, if they fall behind on payments, you yourself are missing out because you
Yeah,
still got to pay the mortgage, and technically if you set it up and you've done it properly, they would be covering your mortgage for you.
yeah,
So
exactly. And especially with the new renters' rights bill coming into play, probably within the next couple months,
yeah, hopefully.
where, well, not hopefully for us, I
Yeah,
don't think.
not
Well,
hopefully,
I
but
think it's
yeah,
it's more going to affect the lower end of landlords, which we wouldn't be. But if you do have a tenant in there that isn't going to be paying the rent, it is going to be a lot harder with these new regulations to actually be able to evict them from your property.
yeah.
So, and that can introduce more costs. So that is a much higher risk now with the regular buy to let. But there are obviously ways to minimize that risk, which would be doing proper tenant screening and ensure that if your property is a good property, you've got a decent enough asking price and you're attracting the right people and you're making sure that you screen them properly, you shouldn't have any of those issues.
Yeah, I think that's what it's all about nowadays. In terms of mitigating that risk is just making sure you're getting the right people in, making sure your property's in good hands in terms of who's tenanting it.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think also the management plays a big part. If you're managing it yourself, you can go through and see, which ways you can mitigate the risk. But if you've got a good management company, they will do that for you.
yeah, 100%. So that strategy is mainly for, I wouldn't say new investors only, but for people who are looking to get into it, they've got a bit of capital, and just looking for a simple long-term investment.
Yeah, a
Just
very
to,
passive,
yeah,
long-term sort of, yeah. So the next one we'll be looking at is sort of buy to let strategy,
can be,
except
yeah, can be,
you've got the an additional step. So this is the buy, refurbish, refinance, and I think this is the one we'd be more inclined to
yeah,
do just because of our more hands-on experience, especially within the refurb stage. Because obviously our company does do a lot of property maintenance. We do have a lot of experience in the construction industry, and so I think we'd be more inclined to do
get
that.
hands on with us and,
Yeah,
and do the refurbishment or
I think because we
majority of the
also,
refurb
yeah,
ourselves.
we also enjoy doing those sorts of things. So, how does the buy, refurbish, refinance strategy actually work?
So what you're gonna first basically you need to do is you need to find a below market value property. Uh, that's where you need to start. So you're gonna buy the property. That's where the B comes in from BRR. So you're gonna buy the property, then you're gonna look at refurbishing the property. Now you can either go and spend a lot of money on making it a really good high class property, but then you're gonna cut down some of your profits that you're going to be making when it's revalued. Hopefully, you've got added value onto that. And then once it's refurbished, you're going to have someone come around and appraise the property, and that's where the refinancing part comes in. Is once they've appraised it, hopefully you've got a higher value for your property now you've refurbished it, um, and you're going to get it refinanced, and then you're going to take that money out from the refinance, and you're going to potentially put it into another deal.
Hmm.
So it's a really good way of if you're looking to build a portfolio and just recycle your money, it's a really good strategy to use. Yeah,
So I think the one key point in there is making sure that you is working out your finance. So obviously, you said a starting point would be buying the property, but I think within this strategy, we need to also think about the financial part of it
yeah,
because with this, especially with the refinance, is if you buy the property on a mortgage, when you do that refurb, say you do the refurb, and I mean, we do the refurb quite
yeah,
quick, I'd say 3 months, full rewire, everything.
yeah, yeah,
No,
100%, yeah,
but say you do it within a year, if you've done the property on a mortgage, say that was a 2 year term, you're then going to have to wait those 2 years to be able to
yeah,
refinance. So whereas if you buy the property for cash, you can then straight away go on to a mortgage product to be able to pull that money
yeah,
out.
yeah,
So it is working out your finances and how you're actually going to do that initial purchase and then what you're going to do with the refinance. So another way of doing this is obviously with the bridging loan, which does bring in more costs and a bit more risk in terms of using a bridging loan. But I think that is one of the, obviously, as you said, the starting point is buying it for the strategy, but also understanding how the finances work within it would be a key part when you're looking at this strategy.
yeah. So for some of those people who are listening to this that don't really have a clue and they're starting to get into property, we're going to give you a quick example, just throwing some numbers at you. Um, just so you understand a little bit better. So you're going to buy a property, let's say £100,000. You're going to buy the property for that much. You want to spend around 20k, £20,000 on a refurbishment, and then hopefully you're going to get it revalued at 150k. So that 30 grand that you make, well, you won't be making it, but that's extra value you've got on top. Then it comes around to refinance. You can pull out around 75% of that money. So of 150k, you're going to get about £112,000. So you can take that £112,000 and put that into your next project. So that's just a quick example for some of you who don't have the deepest understanding of property yet, but you're in the right place to learn.
So obviously, with that quick example that you've given, there are multiple factors to also consider. So
Yeah,
obviously, that is a very quick example, not including any of your stamp duty cost,
yeah,
etc.,
very
which yeah,
basic. Yeah,
you will need to factor a lot of that in and try get the property for as lower amount as possible and
yeah,
get it revalued at a very high price because that is the one thing that you need to look at.
Yeah, it's a bit of a juggling act. How much do you buy it for? How much do you put into refurb to get the best possible evaluation? You sort of have to look at it and do your due
Yeah.
diligence
You
on the
have to do
area.
your numbers, and you have to, I think with doing the BRR is literally putting it into a calculator. You can build a spreadsheet, but literally putting in every single cost.
Yeah,
I mean, stamp duty, if you're buying it on a mortgage, or if you're doing a bridging loan, put in all those, that interest on that bridging loan, put in all the costs in there. And when you're doing the refurb, so the budgeting for the actual materials and buying it and the labor, don't try to say, okay, well, I'm going to do this entire house and it's going to cost me X, and try make it cost as less amounts as
yeah,
possible. Especially if you don't have that much experience, just guessing and going, oh yeah, the
yeah,
refurb will cost 30 grand. Actually go in there and itemize what each amount is going to cost, because once you do that, you'll actually and add everything up. So, in a bathroom, you're going to be buying the shower tray, the
yeah.
basin,
You want everything on that spreadsheet.
itemize everything possible, and you actually see that the refurb's going to cost a lot more. And you do want to overestimate that refurb
Yeah,
cost, because then when it actually comes time to doing it, if you do end up being lower, then it's a good surprise. You
yeah,
make a bit more, but you don't want to be going over that budgeted amount for that refurb, which will then cut into that revaluation amount. And this is where the problems occur with bridging loans, is if you've then spent too much,
yeah,
you then try to refinance, and you actually cannot refinance enough to now pay back that bridging loan. So you need to be very careful when you're working out your figures to actually, I'd say, overestimate your budget on the refurb.
yeah. Definitely.
Not too much, but you do want to make
You
sure
have
you
to
have
do your
enough
due
money in there.
diligence.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So some of the pros for BIR strategy is obviously you get to recycle your money, hopefully, if you've done it correctly. Forced appreciation, which it is forced, but you have to, again, do your numbers and make sure it's going to work. It's more of a calculated appreciation. And then also it is better on cash returns.
Yeah, so I think that that cash return that you're getting is going to be an immediate cash
Yeah,
return. As we are talking about with the buy to let, we are saying, the capital appreciation may take, 10, 20 years for you to then have enough. Well, I mean, you could do it after 5 years, depending, but to have enough to actually refinance and fully
yeah,
pull that money out. Whereas this, as you said, it's a forced appreciation. If you're doing a loft conversion or a rear extension, adding a bedroom, something like that, where you're actually adding that value,
yeah,
that's instant value
yeah,
that you're adding in this strategy. So I mean, that's where that cash on cash returns. It's instant cash return.
yeah. So some of the cons, which we don't really like to talk about, but we got to just highlight them. So you do have the risk of getting downvalued. This is sort of highly unlikely, but it could happen. Um, so yeah, just watch out for that. Do your
But when you're
numbers.
saying down valuation, is that you're not meeting the expected amount that you
Yeah, so if
think?
you
Yeah.
let's go back to our example. Let's say you estimated that your new valuation after buying a property and refurbing it, your new valuation was going to be 150. You've gone and bought the property for 100 grand. You spent 20 grand on it, so you're in for 120. Let's say you only reevaluated at, I don't know, £125,000.
Yeah.
You're only really getting £5,000. You're not making that much, so
Yeah, so
you've got to watch out for
it
that.
may not meet your expectations of,
Yeah.
of what it is, depending on what the valuation comes.
Right, so finishing off with BIR strategy, the next one we're going to be talking about is rent to rent. So just explain to the viewers and the listeners what rent to rent is.
So rent to rent essentially is what you do. I mean, let's talk about it. As you were saying, we're looking at stuff within a residential atmosphere, sort of what we're doing. So rent to rent would be, let's say there's a landlord, he's not too keen on being a landlord anymore. As you said, depends what passive is. You would approach them and say you'd give him a fixed amount of rental income. to be able to control the property, and then you would then rent that property from him, but then you would then sublet it, legally sublet it through the contract that you use, to then be able to rent the property out at a higher rate. So the way that it does work is that the you will agree with the landlord to pay them a set rent,
Yeah.
but for a set amount of time as well, which say it would be for 5 years, which is typically why you'd get the property at a much lower rent because you're giving him
Guaranteed
that
rent.
guaranteed rent for 5 years. And he knows it's going to be paid, which is why he'll give you a discount on the rent, which will allow you to then rent the property out at a higher rate, and the difference that you're obviously paying him to the amount that you're
Yeah.
renting out, you get to keep. Now, with the rent to rent, you can go in there and convert it into multiple different things. So you can do rent to HMO, where instead of renting the property out as the
The
entire
whole
property,
property. Yeah.
you'll rent each room out. So obviously you'll go in there, do a bit of work to the property, converting it into an HMO, getting an HMO license, and then renting each room out. So say you're paying the landlord £1,000 per month, you're renting say it's a 4 bedroom house, you're renting each room out for £500 per month. You will then Your total rent that you'll be receiving is 2,000. You're paying the landlord £1,000. The £1,000 difference is then your profit.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are other costs to factor in because in HMO you'll be liable for the council tax,
Yeah, of
the
course.
electricity bill,
Yeah.
etc., etc. But that is essentially how it works. Or you could do rent to service accommodation, which is fairly similar. Instead of obviously doing HMO, you'll be doing service accommodation. So you'd rent the property, sort of make it into a nice sort of Airbnb, and then put it online and rent it out as an Airbnb.
Yeah, either as the whole property as an Airbnb or just do separate rooms with a shared kitchen or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is a good strategy. I think a lot of people are jumping on board with this. It's blown up quite a bit, so you don't have to have major capital to start this, which is quite good for beginners.
Mhm.
You can sort of just go and get a landlord who's keen on doing this, get a contract, and start renting out, and start hopefully getting rooms or the whole house rented out, like you say, and then just start getting some profit off of that. So it's
Yeah,
quite
so I
passive.
think with rent to rent, obviously there are a lot of regulations around it, especially with the contract that you use with the landlord to be able to then sublet the property. So you want to make sure that you actually do your research on what contracts you need to use to be able to then legally do that.
Yeah,
And then also the tenancy agreements that you're then going to be renting out. And also some things for the landlord to bear in mind is to make sure that the company, the mortgage lender that he's using is also happy
yeah,
for him to do this, because obviously all the lenders have different
yeah, of
requirements,
course.
and he may need to let them know. So make sure that everything is above board. Rent to rent is sort of, I don't think it's too new, but I know there is a lot of regulation about it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so
subletting.
definitely,
Yeah, yeah,
if
of
you are
course.
going to be doing this strategy, have a look into what things you need to take
Yeah,
off.
what paperwork, what you need in your contract, all sorts of details and regulations you have to apply to. Some of the pros around rent to rent is you don't need a mortgage or a big deposit to put down. You get quite a fast cash flow if you can get up and running quite quickly. And then it's great for gaining experience around property and property investing. Like I say, you're working with landlords and people who are within the property industry, so they're going to be teaching you. You're going to be learning regulations and all of that stuff. So it's a very good way to learn and gain knowledge around the property industry without being tied down to a single house, let's say with a mortgage. So it is quite a good strategy for that.
And then some of the cons would be obviously, like we've spoken about, you need the landlord's permission, and obviously making sure that he is actually aware that you are going to be subletting the property, and that he doesn't actually think you're going to be living there. Um, there's also, it is quite management heavy, so it will be very hands on, especially if you're doing serviced accommodation. Again, you can sort of get someone else to do it. But then again, that is going to eat into your profits. And because your profits are quite tight on this strategy, it is something that you are probably going to want to do yourself. And again, as we said, there are a lot of legal requirements in terms of doing this. So with licensing, so that would be with your HMOs, you also need insurance and the various contracts to be able to do so.
So finishing off rent to rent, the strategy is mainly for low capital beginners or those people who just want a fast income and they have to be okay with being hands-on and dealing with possible tenants on a weekly or however you want to rent it out. If you want to rent it out weekly, you're going to have to be more hands-on with these bookings and stuff like that. So we're going to move on to the final strategy, and that is HMOs.
So yes, obviously HMOs. So we've spoken about buy to lets, buy refurbish refinance, and rent to rent. And I think HMOs can actually fit into any one of those sort of strategies. So it is sort of a sub strategy to one of those. And yeah, so Matt, what exactly is an HMO?
Well, an HMO, if you break it down, is a house of multiple occupants. So you can have a six-bed house, for example. Each bedroom is going to be let out separately. So you can have six tenants, and most of the time you can have a communal area such as your kitchens. You might find some of the HMOs will have en suites. You might have shared bathrooms in some instances. But basically, to break it down, you're going to have six-bedroom house, a three-bedroom house, whatever size house you have. You're going to have separate tenants in each bedroom.
Yeah, so each tenant will actually have a separate tenancy agreement. So you won't be doing it as a full house, as you said. On one tenancy agreement, you'll be renting each room out. So what this can do is, in say you would rent out a four-bedroom house, say for £2,000 a month. If you rent it out as an HMO, you're renting out each room. Say each room you could rent out for £750 per month,
Yeah.
which would give you, quick maths, £3,000 per month. So the income that you generate off of an HMO is typically a lot higher than if you were to rent that out as a single on a single tenancy.
Yeah, single let, yeah, 100%. It is more you do get it is more profitable. Like you say, you've got four bedrooms, which can charge a lot more per bedroom depending on the quality of the HMO and the standard that you've done the house to. So if it's all en suites, uh, really good finishings, all of that stuff, you could even be looking at 800, £900 per room, also depending on the area which it is situated in.
Yes, I
So
think that's
yeah,
around us. You could get sort of up to, maybe even £950
yeah,
per month in a good area in Guildford. So we obviously do maintenance part of our company, and we maintain around 30 HMOs here in Guildford. So that obviously did is what got us into property, and what we learned a lot from is just seeing the HMOs, how they're set up, and it's one of the strategies that we really like. So I think what we would be implementing is maybe into a buy to let or a buy refurbish refinance strategy, is making it into an HMO and then renting it out
yeah.
from
So
there.
ultimately, we'd be looking at potentially buying a property that's just your normal standard single let property, refurbing it, and included in those refurbs might be dividing some of the rooms up, creating some extra spaces, uh, and adding maybe one or two extra rooms to convert it into an HMO, and then yeah, just renting it out from there as an HMO.
So obviously some of the pros to doing HMOs, as we've spoken about, is a much higher rental income compared to single lets. You also have a much more diversified income. So if one tenant decides not to pay, you still have the other tenants within the property that
Yeah,
are paying. So this can mean that, it's not coming from one source. If one tenant doesn't pay, you've still got the reliability of the other tenants. And there's a strong demand for HMOs in, well, student cities. So if you've got a university around, HMOs,
yeah, they're brilliant.
yeah,
Yeah,
very high in demand. Areas with hospitals or
yeah.
near a hospital, a lot of the hospital workers may want to live in an HMO. So
And
yeah,
also, yeah, lots of professionals, if they're coming down for
Yeah, working away. Yeah.
Contract work for, I don't know, they come down for 6 months, they might be looking at getting a HMO, just a single room on its own. Yeah, so it's very good for professional students and other workers. So yeah,
Now, of course, obviously, as good as this strategy does sound, there are some cons. So this strategy does need a lot more management with it because you've got more tenants.
yeah,
There's a lot more management to go along with that. So doing viewings, if you've, the cycle, the turnover of tenants will be a lot more. So you need to do a lot more viewings. There's also a lot more regulation around it within the licensing of an HMO. So you will actually need to get a license, which you can apply through your local council, where they'll come assess that the property is actually set up as an HMO, which is normally your space regulations. You've got some fire regulations in there, so ensuring there's smoke alarms in necessary areas, and then yeah, just the actual space. As I said, I think the minimum is 6 square meters. I might be
yeah,
wrong.
yeah. You
Might
have to
be
make sure the
around there.
rooms are
The room,
adequate
yeah.
sized, and then also it can be harder to find people to finance it and insure it. Obviously, you've got six different tenancies in that property, and sometimes the turnover on those tenancies can be quite often. So just trying to find the right people to finance it and also insure it is also key.
All right, guys. So that actually brings us to the end of the podcast. So as we've gone through, we've talked about the buy to let strategy, the buy, refurbish, refinance, the rent to rent, and then HMOs. So I think it's a really good podcast that we've just done. It covers some of the really sort of beginner strategies that if you're looking at getting into property, this is a good place to begin.
Yeah, 100%. So thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to go and head over to our YouTube channel where we talk about all things property related, different strategies and topics around property. So head over to our YouTube channel at Galton Homes and we will see you later.
See you later.